Thanks, Penny, and thanks very much, I guess, for coming along tonight. Just before I start, I would like to acknowledge Arthur Murray, who is a really staunch activist for so many years around death and custody issue, who lost his son tragically at the hands of the police in the early 1980s and fought very, very hard for justice and was never given justice before he passed away only a couple of months ago. And he certainly taught me a lot about the police, about how to fight and campaign. So we really miss him, and it's I think it's important to acknowledge his contribution. Just to start on the question of justice that was denied to Arthur, and denied to so many people. When you think about it, it's a basic human need. If something bad has happened to you or someone that you love, there's been something that's inflicted on them, you feel like, you need that to be set right in some way. You need there to be some recompense where you can feel that the society out there respects you and you can move amongst that society. And if you don't get that, it's just that burning sense. And all of us know, that feeling, and, Aboriginal people obviously more than any, the need for justice. But you'd say today that institutions which are supposed to deliver justice are alien from us. It's something that we have no control over, the process of justice. Watching this week that young fella, the video of that young fella getting tasered, getting tortured by the police, 14-year-old, getting tortured, screaming for his dead mother, while the police actually taser him there on the ground. And there's nothing we can do about that. In the formal system, there's nothing we can do about that. There's no one we can call, there's no one we can do to actually get justice for that person. So it's separate. The justice system is this alien force. And I think most people always think that is how it has to be, that there is a state that we have to appeal to that has to be separate from us that delivers justice. But here in this country, of course, Aboriginal people lived for so many thousands of years. That wasn't the case at all. 500,000, 1 million people on this continent of Australia, where justice was something that they were all responsible for. And that they all, every day had some say over actually, had processes they could go through, as a community and as a people to have some, to come, to right wrongs and, and make justice real. That state, that alien state and what it represents comes with colonisation. In Australia, it's something that was imposed on this country, and it's a very particular form of state. It's a colonial settler state that was brought here to Australia, and I think Penny touched at the start. It's important that we understand the nature of a colonial settler state, what it is, and that at the very foundation and the principle of a colonial settler state, foundational principle is the elimination of the Indigenous people who were there before, or certainly the elimination, the attempted elimination of their social structures. And you only have to look at what's been happening over the last week in Palestine. Israel wants those people gone. It wants them dead. It wants them gone. Can just murder with impunity. That extreme logic, that colonial settler state logic that's on display has been happening here in Australia on a slow burn, for so many hundreds of years. And I think when you look here in Australia, even at the start, I'll talk about the question of the police and where the police come from. Most of my talk today is actually just going to be about the question of the police and what they represent in relation to Aboriginal people. And it's probably I've planned a fair bit more than I'll be able to give. So just bear with some generalisations. But here in Australia, the police aren't there right at the start. It's basically a military dictatorship that comes on the boat. They set up a prison camp in the basin of Sydney. They go down to set up another prison camp on Van Diemen's Land. And it's not actually until the early 19th century that you get the formation of a police force in Australia. The first police force is here in Sydney. And it's interesting about why the police are established. Actually, the police at this time are just being established, police forces are being established in Britain as well. There's a lot of discussion in Britain about how are we going to deal with the unruly social elements that have been created by the process of industrialisation. The massive, masses of people coming into places like London, and the huge social disorder and challenges that are posed to the ruling elites in those countries at that time. That's why they set up the police. They set up the police in London in around 1820 to deal with the huge crowds of striking workers, the demonstrations that are happening, people demanding control over their lives, wages, and the vote. Actually, working people didn't have the vote at that time. That's why they actually established the police, to deal with those demonstrations. If you just have a military, the only thing you can do is shoot a demonstration down. And that creates a whole lot of martyrs that are going to come back stronger. So you need a police force that can be more subtle in the way it tries to repress dissent. Here in Australia, around this time in around 1820, they've got their own problems to deal with, the colonial masters that have set up camp in Sydney. They've got their own problems to deal with. Firstly, that process of the Industrial Revolution is crying out for wool, and so you have a massive expansion of the Australian colony over the top of the Blue Mountains, over the Hawkesbury River, over the rivers to the south. They're expanding out. And what are they coming into conflict with? Everywhere, of course, the Aboriginal people that are there. The police force in Australia is actually established to deal with Aboriginal people. In Bathurst, Bathurst in 1824, a horrendous massacre of the Wiradjuri people takes place, at the hands of the New South Wales Corps. And in the wake of that massacre, the discussion happens in Sydney. We need a more subtle and systematic way to deal with this, and they set up that mounted police in 1825. The mounted police, which continue, exactly the same organisation, which continues to set up shop in Redfern and Surrey Hills, continues to be there, boasts on its website about being the longest serving mounted police unit in the whole world. So it's the same people that, that then the mounted police go on to massacre the Gamilaroi, the banks of the Namoy River in 1838. There's a huge massacre of Gamilaroi people, hundreds of people that are killed. That same police force is the police force that's actually out there riding horseback through Redfern the day after that young Gamilaroi boy, TJ Hickey, dies at the hands of the police, and the Aboriginal people come out in response to that. It's precisely the same people. So I think it's very, very important that we actually do that at the root, and actually the foundation of the establishment of the police force is the massacres, the dispossession of the Aboriginal people, and that's that's where it comes from. Just reflecting as well, how did we get from that point where you have a police force set up to essentially massacre Aboriginal people to where we are now? Well, so I will make the point, that the system that they had for allocating Aboriginal land to the squatters at the time, there was legislation that was passed in 1838, around the same time as those massacres of the Gamilaroi were taking place, where they set up legislation about how they could parcel out the land to the people that were squatting in the land. That very same legislation sets up another regiment called the Border Police, who then go on and carry out some massacres. So the things go hand in hand, the theft of the Aboriginal land and the establishment of the police forces. But I think what's very important as well is there's an ideology that goes along with a police force and the development of a police force that's different from the armed forces which existed previously in England and other places in Europe, where it's open that the armed forces that you have are there at the behest of the ruling elites at the time. They've got their militia, they've got their army, they set it against the poor people. With the police, there's this ideology that comes along with it that everyone is treated by the police equally. They're just there to uphold, a civilian order that everyone's treated equally with. The only way they can get away with treating Aboriginal people with such extreme impunity and brutality and injustice, the only way that can happen is by setting up a racist ideology which says that Aboriginal people are inhuman. That's absolutely part and parcel. That racist ideology about Aboriginal people is part and parcel of the creation of the police forces themselves. And once you have the closure of the frontier in terms of all the massacres that are happening and taking place, happening right around Australia, in the Northern Territory, those massacres continue. 1928, the Coniston Massacre, carried out again by the same police force, the Northern Territory Police Force, that killed Kumanjai Briscoe, killed his family en masse in 1828, out in the fields to set up. It's the same people, the same force, operating out of the same areas and police stations. Once that process of massacre is complete, the police then become the protectors of the surplus population that's left over that the colonial government doesn't know how to deal with. And we don't have too much time to go into the nature of the Protection Acts that are actually established, but basically for about 100 years in Australia, what you had was an apartheid system, all over the country, where Aboriginal people are second-class citizens, are held in reserves, are held in concentration camps, have got these laws on them which mean they're not subhuman, not like the rest of Australia, and it's the police that are the protectors. It's the police that distribute the rations. It's the police that take the children from their mothers. It's the police that say whether or not a person can travel over to the next community or not. So the police and Aboriginal people for 100 years develop together, the force and the lives that they're controlling and the people that that they're ruling over. Those things come together. You do have other organisations and officials that are involved in the protection boards. You have officials that are working just for the protection board, but the chief protector in Queensland is always a police officer, and time and time again it's actually on the ground in those reserves that it's the police that are administering that regime. So what you see then in the next phase, I suppose, of this development of the relationship between Aboriginal people and the police is the era of formal equality, when they break up the reserves, when they break up the Protection Acts, when those things are repealed in the 1950s and the 1960s. It's in that period where you see the mass incarceration of Aboriginal people. They were incarcerated as a whole. I mean, in Queensland, people who were living on reserves were actually called inmates by the government, right? Once those reserves are broken up, and Aboriginal people start moving into the bigger cities and towns and areas like that, and the legislation is repealed that's formally racist, so we don't have racist legislation anymore. We've got rid of the Protection Acts, we've got rid of the reserves. It's then that you start to see the prisons fill up quickly. In the 1950s and the 1960s, for example, in Western Australia, Aboriginal people go from being about 1 to 2% of the prison population to being 30% of the prison population. In South Australia, similarly, 1 or 2% goes to about 25% in the space of 2 decades. Because now it's no longer the Aboriginal Protection Act that's being used to control you, it's the criminal law that's applied, again, on a racist basis and can only operate on that basis, if those racist ideas about Aboriginal people are accepted. Here in Redfern, for example, there's a curfew that's imposed on Aboriginal people in the 1960s and the 1970s using the Liquor Act. If it's after 10 p.m. and you're black and you're on the street, they take you to the cells and they say you're drunk. Whether you're drunk or not, it doesn't matter. The police have got a curfew, actually, against Aboriginal people. And I think that it's in that context, the rebellion against that, the fight against that, the establishment of the Aboriginal legal services, the mass marches, the demands for Aboriginal rights, it's in that context that you actually get the call starting for a Royal Commission. Aboriginal people are dying in custody. 99 people died in custody in the 10-year period before the Royal Commission. People were marching, people demanding change, saying that this isn't okay. And so much that we know. Aboriginal people know it intimately, but so much that the rest of us know about the problems of Indigenous incarceration and police brutality come from that campaign for justice, for that Royal Commission, and from the findings for the Royal Commission. And the Royal Commission comes out with a whole host of recommendations that are designed to get rid of this problem. We're going to de-incarcerate Aboriginal people, decriminalise, public drunkenness, and try and stop the deaths and stop the incarceration. Unfortunately for the Aboriginal people, however, that time in the 1990s when that report comes down, around the world there is a shift to far more aggressive forms of policing that's taking place. In New York, they have the what do they call it? Zero tolerance policing, starts in New York. Everywhere else, it's law and order campaigns. And I think I'll have to finish now. But just to bring us to where we are today, in a very short space of time, the last 20 years since that Royal Commission have been an absolute disaster. So the white population, the non-Indigenous population, starts getting incarcerated at higher rates because of this push all around the world for law and order, and as well the neoliberalism, the attacks on the social services that were, for poor and oppressed people. There was something, maybe public housing, other, public institutions they could rely on, start to get attacked as the police forces are really bolstered. See, in 1984 in Australia, it was 85 prisoners per 100,000 people. By 2004, it's 157 prisoners per 100,000 people. That's the non-Indigenous population. 2012, today, it's 166 prisoners per 100,000 people. But for Aboriginal people, the increase in incarceration over this period is 12 times that rate. In 1992, 14% of the prison system's Aboriginal. In 2007, 24% of the prison system's Aboriginal. In 1992, when the Commission hands down its report, 2,224 Aboriginal people are in custody. In March this year, 7,873 Aboriginal people were in custody. Right. So in the last 20 years, there has been an exceptionally profound increase in that level of repression of people being taken in, and that's why the deaths in custody just keep happening and are just going to keep happening until we can do something to actually stand up and turn that situation around. And I'd argue that the Northern Territory intervention represents that absolute culmination of the racist policies that Howard had pushed for so long, trying to erase all the gains of the Aboriginal rights movement. They reinstate the Protection Board in the Northern Territory with the intervention. A whole set of laws that say Aboriginal people are somehow second class, are under control, and need to have a whole other system, just like they did in the Protection Acts again. But it's the police cell in the modern day that becomes the tool. So we've had a 70% increase in Indigenous incarceration since the Northern Northern Territory intervention in 2007. Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory are now one of the highest incarcerated people on the face of the planet. Same with Aboriginal people in Western Australia. It is an absolute acute crisis. It's something which has to stop. And I think that, a very important point that's made by Alec. Unless we can hold these people accountable, unless we can actually say Aboriginal people are human too and deserve the respect and the treatment, that's expected of everyone else. Kumanjay Briscoe can't just be taken off the street for no reason, smashed in the head, left in a police cell to die, and then the coroner stand up in the court and say, oh, these police are all good men, and I know that they're good people, and they didn't really mean to do anything wrong, and that's fine, and it's bad that he's dead, but we can all just go about our business now. It's not okay. Lines have to be drawn in the sand, and I personally argue that the whole system of policing that exists in this country is predicated and built upon dispossession and genocide of Aboriginal people. And it's only by confronting, standing up and radically transforming that system that we're going to see those changes start to turn those things around. So hopefully in the discussion, we can talk about taking some of those fights forward. Thank you. Cheers.